The year is 1944, and Germany is clearly losing the war. The Soviet Union has recaptured the most important territories it lost in 1941, allowing it to supply itself with valuable resources that it used to produce more tanks and planes, while Germany is losing its only grain storage in Europe. It's now obvious that Soviet Union was doing pretty good job, unlike other Allied members who only have to sit and watch because they have no place to station their army in Europe. That's why they gathered in the Tehran conference and decided that Soviet Union will not start another military operation until United States lands in Europe. This idea not welcomed by Soviet Union, like why would Red Army have to wait while it can invade Germany? At first, this idea seemed logical for United States, but they handled the situation well. So, after making the Soviet Union accept to wait, they now have to decide where to land. There are so many places they can choose, but they choose Normandy for this operation. The reason is that the beaches of Normandy are larger than other locations, and also it's a weak point in the Atlantic Wall that Germany built back in 1941. But obviously, they cannot let Germany understand where they are preparing to land. That's why they began another operation to trick Germany into believing that this landing would happen right here. This city is so close to Britain that artillery sounds can be heard by the British people there. So, that's why the Allies began to prepare fake planes, tanks, and soldiers to trick Germany into believing a fake army was preparing to land there, when in fact, they were already ready to go for Normandy. One day, the Germans woke up and saw something weird. The planes that were supposed to head towards Germany had now changed their direction to France. Also, those planes weren't dropping the usual stuff, they were dropping people. Thousands of paratroopers were landing in the middle of the night, making the German soldiers meeting their surprise roommates. At the same time, the American Navy and Air Force started shooting the beaches of Normandy. The goal was simple: weaken the defenses so the soldiers could walk in like it's a beach vacation, which is not going as planned because most of the shells landed everywhere except the German bunkers. Anyway, to make sure Germany couldn't send its army from the east to the west, United States now allowed the Red Army to launch its own massive operation against Army Group Center, which started at nearly the same time as D-Day and resulted in one of the greatest victories for the Allies. Now, if you think the Germans are going to send all their troops to the two fronts they're fighting on, fly every plane they've got to shoot down American ships, recruit more soldiers, pushing Allies back in Normandy, and then sending reinforcements to the east, you are wrong, because they basically choose to did nothing. German generals looked at the west and thought, yeah, it doesn't look good. Then they looked at the east and said, well, that actually looks good. Let's just send more soldiers to the west, especially the tank divisions that could be our only way to hold back the Red Army. After bringing the strongest and fresh soldiers to the west, instead of ordering them to face the coming American soldiers and welcome them with tough resistance, Germans choose to locate them as reserve units. This crucial mistake led the most elite German forces to only sit and watch while United States begun its advancement. Now, even though they played some clever tricks, like dropping fake paratrooper mannequins to make Germany lose some time, most of their real paratroopers are now encircled, and they can't risk having them destroyed anymore. So, they must hurry and secure the beaches. But they couldn't just drop the whole thing on the beaches at once. That could end in a disaster. So the main forces had to wait in other areas until the beaches were safe. Actually, nothing like this had ever happened in history before. There had never been such a huge naval invasion. So honestly, the Allies didn't really know how it was going to work. But after a lot of careful planning and a mountain of maps and coffee, they decided to split the landing into 4 main sections. The Americans and the British took the first missions, and for some of them, things went relatively smoothly. But then Omaha Beach showed up. American soldiers ran into the toughest resistance of the entire invasion. Especially the German artillery was a big problem for the American soldiers. They were firing at the invading forces, maybe even before they could get out of their landing craft. Some shells were even knocking out the amphibious tanks before they touched the sand. That's why the American commanders ordered the paratroopers to leave the towns they had just captured and go silence the German artillery units. And surprisingly, they made it. Every artillery piece is now destroyed, and the beach landings had a fighting chance. Also, it should be pointed out that the American staff played a clever trick. They sailed some battleships toward the fake landing zone, the one Germany was absolutely convinced would be the real invasion point. So, while German commanders were staring on that decoy, the actual landings were already happening in Normandy. This meant that most German troops were lined up to fight a battle that was never going to happen. That helped the United States to win the biggest naval invasion in history. Things were going so well for the Americans that they thought, you know what? We're doing a good job. Let's try a counterattack. And so they did. The result? Most German units in the area were destroyed. Some American forces even pushed deep into French territory and began setting up their own supply routes to keep the army fed and moving. These recent losses made the German staff really angry, and they started thinking that they should do something about it. And this is the moment when Germany's elite forces finally decided to step in. But here's the problem for them. The Americans already knew that German tank divisions were waiting behind the front lines. So, when the attack came, the US was ready. They brought in their own tanks, paratroopers, and, most importantly, they fought inside the towns, where tanks were basically useless. In the end, those elite German corps were defeated too, and their attempt to push back the US failed. With that, Germany's last hope of taking back France was officially over. After Normandy was secured by the United States, well, actually it's more accurate to say northern France, the Allied forces didn't stop with that. They eventually linked up with their Southern Army group, which had landed at a completely different time in a completely different operation. But I'll talk about it in another video. Together, they pushed through and successfully liberated France. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union is pushing forward without slowing down. They almost completely wiped out Germany's Army Group Center, trapped a huge chunk of Army Group North, liberated nearly the entire Balkans, and even stepped into Eastern Germany itself. After these recent events, the year 1944 nearly came to an end with a clear Allied victory. After this point, most of the German staff acknowledged that Germany had clearly lost the war, and there was no chance left to change the course of the war. But there is still something they want to try on the Western Front. They gathered their tanks, army, and air forces to try the same operation that made them win back in 1940. Their purpose is to catch the Americans off guard before they step into Western Germany and eventually recapture France, then focus on the Eastern Front again. But as it turned out, nothing went the way Germany expected.